she had always been quiet, the kind of person who could sit in a corner of a room and observe everything without saying much. People often overlooked her, thinking she was shy or maybe not very confident. But inside, there was a fire, a determination that no one could see at first glance. She had a talent that she nurtured quietly, away from the noise of the world. Every day, she would spend hours perfecting her skill, losing herself in the rhythm and flow of what she loved. It was not for recognition or applause. It was for herself, a place where she could truly feel alive and free. Her mornings began early. The house was quiet, and she would sit at the piano, letting her fingers glide over the keys with a gentle precision. Sometimes she would play softly, barely audible, as if sharing a secret with the empty room. Other times, she would let the music fill every corner, creating a world where only she existed. She didn't think about anyone watching or judging. She played because it was the only way she could express what words could not. Her family noticed her dedication, but never fully understood the depth of her talent. They thought it was a hobby, something cute but not serious. But she knew deep down that this was more than a hobby. This was her life in her small town. People had their routines and their expectations. No one really imagined that someone so quiet and unassuming could ever do something extraordinary. She walked the streets unnoticed, carrying her dreams like a secret treasure. When she went to work, she blended in, smiling politely, helping customers, and never drawing attention to herself. Some days were hard, and she felt the weight of being underestimated. People would comment on her simplicity, on how she would never stand out in a crowd. She tried not to let it bother her, but it stung more than she'd like to admit. One day, a flyer appeared in the local community center. It announced a talent showcase, a competition open to anyone who wanted to participate. The grand prize was small, nothing life-changing. But the opportunity to perform in front of a panel of judges was something that caught her attention immediately. She read the flyer over and over, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. Could she do it? Would she be able to perform in front of people who had no idea who she was? The thought of stepping into the spotlight made her nervous, but it also made her feel alive. This could be the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to show the world what she could do. She didn't tell anyone about her decision at first. She wanted to prepare in private, to make sure she could give her best without the pressure of other people's opinions. She practiced every day, sometimes late into the night. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, her music growing richer and more expressive. Each day, she felt a little braver, a little more ready. Still, doubts crept in. What if she stumbled? What if people laughed? What if she wasn't as good as she thought? The closer the day of the competition came, the more intense her emotions became. She watched others around town, imagining who might participate. Many of them were flashy and confident, people who thrived on attention. They had trained publicly, showing off their skills, expecting to impress everyone. In comparison, she felt invisible, a small dot in a world of bright lights. Yet, despite the fear, she felt a quiet determination. She knew that if she allowed herself to be intimidated, she would never reach the stage. She reminded herself that her talent was her own, unique and true. It didn't need validation to exist, but performing in front of an audience would be a test she was ready to face. On the morning of the competition, she woke up early, her stomach fluttering with nervous energy. She dressed carefully, choosing simple clothes that made her feel comfortable and confident. She wanted nothing to distract from her performance. No flashy outfits or overdone makeup. She carried with her a small notebook, filled with notes and reminders she had written for herself, little words of encouragement to stay focused. The walk to the community center felt longer than usual, each step heavy with anticipation. People she passed gave polite smiles, some curious about what the day might bring. But no one could guess the storm of emotions inside her. When she arrived, the community center was buzzing with activity. Participants rehearsed. Friends and family whispered excitedly, and the judges moved about, checking equipment and schedules. She quietly took a seat in a corner, observing the chaos. She noticed the confident performers, their heads held high, their smiles wide, their movements bold. They laughed and joked, clearly expecting to impress. She felt a twinge of doubt but quickly pushed it aside. She reminded herself that her strength was not in showiness, but in the depth and authenticity of her skill. As the competition began, participants came and went, each performance different from the last. Some were good, some mediocre, some lacked passion. She watched silently, noting how the audience reacted, how the judges nodded or frowned, how the atmosphere shifted with each act. It was a learning moment, a chance to see what others valued and what truly resonated with people. She felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. Soon, it would be her turn, and all the practice, all the quiet hours of dedication, would be put to the test. Finally, her name was called. Her heart leaped, and her palms grew sweaty. She stood up slowly, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Walking to the stage, she felt every eye on her, every whisper, every expectation. She could hear the murmurs, some curious, some doubtful, some dismissive. They expected something simple, something safe, something that would pass without leaving a mark. She took a deep breath, stepped onto the stage, and looked out at the crowd. Faces blurred together, but she could feel the weight of their gaze, the invisible pressure to perform. It was daunting, but she reminded herself that she was ready. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, she simply breathed, letting the quiet calm settle over her. She thought about the hours of practice, the struggles, the moments of doubt, the moments of joy. She remembered why she started, why she loved this so deeply. It wasn't about winning or impressing. It was about expressing herself, about sharing a piece of her soul with the world. And with that thought, she pressed the first key. The music started softly, almost timidly, but it carried a gentle confidence. She allowed herself to be fully present, letting the notes flow naturally. Each chord, each melody, each pause was intentional, a reflection of her journey and her passion. The audience listened, some polite, some curious, some beginning to sense that there was something different about this performance. She played as if no one else existed, her entire being focused on the music. On the story she was telling through her fingers, time seemed to stretch and bend around her performance. The world outside the stage disappeared. All that mattered was the music, the connection between her and the audience, the emotion that poured out with every note. She felt the energy of the room, the shift in the air as people leaned in, captivated by what they had not expected. The quiet girl, the unassuming woman, was revealing something extraordinary. And though she didn't know it yet, she was about to leave a mark on everyone watching that day. A mark that would linger long after the final note faded. The moment she stepped off the stage after her performance, she felt a rush of relief and nervous anticipation all at once. The soft applause that followed her final note felt like it was coming from far away. Almost surreal, yet it was enough to make her chest swell with pride. She hadn't known exactly how her performance would be received, but she had poured her heart into every note. As she walked back to her seat, she could feel the curious eyes of the audience following her. Some impressed, some still unsure, but all attentive now in a way they hadn't been before. She could sense a subtle shift in the energy of the room, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, there was more to her than anyone had expected. The other performers had been lively, loud and confident, drawing attention with bold entrances and flashy routines. They moved through the audience with a sense of entitlement, believing that the judges and spectators would be easily swayed by appearances. She, on the other hand, had relied on her genuine skill, the purity of her music, and her personal connection with every note. That contrast was beginning to become apparent, even to the judges who had been expecting another predictable performance. They scribbled notes and exchanged glances, no doubt taken aback by her subtle power and control, sitting quietly in the corner. She watched the next participant step onto the stage. They were confident, loud, and clearly experienced. As the performance began, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and apprehension. Their showmanship was impressive, but she knew it lacked the depth and authenticity that came naturally to her. She felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, while appearances could impress, the heart and soul behind a performance could leave a lasting impression. She thought about the hours she had spent practicing, the countless moments of solitude and focus, and she realized that none of that had been wasted. She was ready for whatever came next. The judges' reactions were subtle at first. They leaned forward slightly, narrowed their eyes, or made small notes on their papers. Their expressions held curiosity, a growing sense that this performance might be different from the rest. For a while she felt disconnected from their observations, knowing that she could not control how others responded. What mattered was the music, the emotion she could convey, and the connection she could make. She reminded herself that recognition was not the goal, though it was a welcome bonus. Her purpose had always been to express herself fully, to give the world a piece of her passion. As the competition continued, she observed the audience with keen attention. Some whispered to each other, exchanging judgments and comments. Others leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding performances. She could see the variety of expectations in the room, the preconceived notions people carried about who could impress and who could not. That awareness only strengthened her resolve. She understood that expectations could be both limiting and misleading, and she was determined to challenge them without arrogance, relying instead on her quiet strength. Between performances, she retreated to her small corner, taking deep breaths to calm the fluttering in her chest. She reviewed the piece she was about to play, running through the sequence in her mind, imagining each chord and melody. Her preparation had been meticulous, but the real test was to bring the music to life in the moment. She knew that nerves were natural, but she refused to let them control her. Each inhale and exhale became a ritual of focus, a way to anchor herself in the present. In those moments, she felt a sense of calm determination, a reassurance that she was capable of rising to the challenge. The competition organizers moved quickly, keeping the schedule tight. Participants went on and off the stage, each leaving their mark in small ways. She noticed the subtle hierarchy forming among the performers, the quiet assumptions about who would win and who would fade into obscurity. Those assumptions didn't concern her. What mattered was her own performance, the authenticity and skill she could bring to each note. She reminded herself that the world often underestimates the quiet, the unassuming, and those who do not seek attention. That was her advantage, the element of surprise that could make all the difference. As the next performance ended, she felt the familiar mix of excitement and anxiety returning. The stage awaited her once more, and she could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down. It was not just about her own nerves. It was about proving that dedication, passion, and authenticity could outshine mere showmanship. She straightened her posture, took another deep breath, and allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had overcome doubt before, faced challenges alone, and honed her craft through countless hours of practice. She was ready to face this moment with confidence. Finally, the call came for her to return to the stage. Her name echoed through the room, drawing the attention of every spectator. She stood up, feeling the familiar flutter in her stomach, but also a growing sense of resolve. As she walked forward, the murmurs of the audience swirled around her. Some were curious, some skeptical, some indifferent. She ignored them all, focusing only on the music, the connection, and the expression she wanted to convey. Every step felt deliberate, every movement measured, till she reached the piano once more. Sitting down, she allowed her fingers to hover briefly above the keys. Silence filled the room, a moment of pause before the magic began. She felt the weight of expectation, both external and internal, but she welcomed it as part of the challenge. This was her chance to show not just skill, but heart, depth, and brilliance. She pressed the first key, and the music flowed effortlessly, carrying with it the emotion, dedication, and soul that had fueled her journey. The audience listened intently, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, all captivated by the unfolding brilliance. The first few notes were deliberate, soft, and controlled, drawing the audience in with subtlety. As the piece progressed, layers of complexity emerged, each chord revealing a depth of understanding and mastery that no one had expected. She played not for recognition, but for the sheer joy of expressing herself fully, allowing her passion to speak louder than words or appearances. Slowly, she felt the room change. The audience was no longer polite observers. They were witnesses to something extraordinary, something that defied their assumptions. The quiet girl they had underestimated was revealing brilliance in its purest form as the performance continued. She felt a surge of confidence. The music carried her forward, each note strengthening her resolve. The judges shifted in their seats, exchanging glances of surprise and admiration. The other participants watched with curiosity, some visibly shaken by the depth and emotion unfolding before them. She played with precision and freedom, balancing technical skill with emotional resonance. Every pause, every crescendo, every subtle nuance was intentional, a reflection of the countless hours she had dedicated to her craft. The audience began to respond, not with polite applause, but with genuine engagement. Some whispered to their neighbors, marveling at the unexpected depth of her performance. Others leaned in, captivated by the story being told through her music. She felt a profound connection with the people watching, a sense that the moment was bigger than herself, that her dedication and passion were reaching hearts in ways she had only dreamed of. This was more than a performance. It was an affirmation of her journey, her perseverance, the quiet brilliance she had always carried within her. Time seemed to blur as she played. Each note was a bridge between her inner world and the audience, a conduit for emotion and expression. She felt no fear, no doubt, only the pure joy of sharing her talent. The music flowed seamlessly, powerful yet gentle, confident yet unassuming. She was no longer the quiet girl in the corner. She was the force that had everyone captivated, a living example of the truth that brilliance often comes from the most unexpected places. As the final notes lingered in the air, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The room was silent, every person holding their breath as the last chord resonated. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the space. It started as a gentle murmur, then grew louder, more confident, until it filled the room with a wave of recognition and admiration. She stood, her heart pounding, a mixture of relief and triumph coursing through her. She had faced the challenge, overcome doubt, and delivered a performance that was authentic, powerful, and unforgettable. The moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, one in which her quiet brilliance could no longer be underestimated. The moment her fingers touched the keys, something changed in the room. At first, the music was soft, almost delicate, inviting the audience in with gentle curiosity. She felt the weight of their eyes upon her, and instead of being intimidated, she let it inspire her. Every note she played carried a piece of herself, her dedication, and the quiet strength she had built over years of practice. The audience listened intently, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, and others exchanging looks of surprise. They had expected something ordinary, something simple. But what unfolded was far from it. The first few measures set the tone, a melody that was familiar yet unexpectedly rich. Her hands moved with precision, but there was also a fluidity that made it feel alive, almost breathing. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story. Each chord carried emotion, each pause held meaning. She could feel the connection forming between herself and the people in the room. A silent understanding that this performance was more than a display of skill. It was an offering of her heart at first. Some in the audience still whispered quietly to each other. They had not yet fully grasped the depth of her talent. Some expected her to stumble, to falter under the pressure of the stage. But as the music continued, those whispers faded into silence. People were captivated, drawn into the world she created with her piano. They didn't just hear the music, they felt it. It carried the weight of her years of practice, her quiet perseverance, and the authenticity that made her performance unforgettable. She played with a careful balance of confidence and vulnerability. There was a part of her that always questioned herself, wondering if she was good enough, if she could impress others with what she loved most. But in this moment, all doubts were gone. She was entirely present, completely immersed in the music, letting it flow naturally. Each note was intentional, each melody deliberate. Yet there was a spontaneity that made the performance feel fresh, alive, and deeply moving. The judges, who had been watching attentively, could no longer hide their surprise. Their pens moved across their sheets, capturing impressions, observations, and perhaps a hint of disbelief. They had expected mediocrity, perhaps a simple performance that would not stand out among the rest. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. Her music was not just technically sound. It carried a unique character, an emotional resonance that went beyond mere execution. It was a reminder that true talent often comes quietly. It's unnoticed until it reveals itself fully. Around the room, the atmosphere shifted. The confident performers who had walked on stage earlier began to watch her closely. Some with curiosity, others with a hint of unease. They had relied on outward showmanship, on the boldness of their gestures. And now they were confronted with the undeniable impact of authenticity and depth. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't loud, but she commanded attention in a way that could not be ignored. Every note, every chord, every pause worked together to captivate, to move, to astonish. As the piece progressed, the music grew more complex, weaving layers of emotion and skill seamlessly. She felt herself becoming part of something larger than the stage, the room, or the competition. It was as if the music connected her to every person present, allowing them to experience a part of her journey, her dedication, and the quiet brilliance that had always lived within her. She could feel the energy of the audience responding, a subtle yet powerful acknowledgement of the talent they had. Underestimated, she noticed small changes in the audience's body language. People leaned in closer, eyes widened in appreciation, and even those who had been skeptical seemed unable to look away. Their expectations, set so low, were being challenged in a profound way. She felt no need to prove herself beyond the music itself. The performance spoke louder than any words could. The beauty of her work was not just in technique, but in the honesty, the emotion, and the personal connection she created with every note. There were moments where the music swelled, rising in intensity, carrying a sense of triumph and excitement. Her fingers danced across the keys with agility and precision. But there was also a fluidity that gave the piece life. The audience responded instinctively, leaning forward, holding their breath, caught in the unfolding magic. Each crescendo, each pause, each delicate touch of a key was a statement, a declaration of her skill, her passion, and the brilliance that had long been underestimated. As the performance continued, she felt a growing sense of liberation. The stage no longer felt intimidating. It felt like home. Every note she played reinforced her belief in herself, in the countless hours of practice and dedication she had invested. She thought of all the moments when people had dismissed her, underestimated her, or overlooked her quietly in life. Each of those moments now fueled her performance, transforming past doubt into present power. Her music was no longer just a melody. It was a story of resilience, determination, and brilliance revealed. The judges' expressions changed subtly. Their eyes widened slightly, lips pressed together in concentration, and pens paused mid-note. They were no longer just evaluating a performance. They were witnessing an unexpected display of artistry, one that defied their assumptions. The quiet woman who had walked onto the stage had captured their attention and admiration in ways they had not anticipated. Even the most skeptical members of the audience found themselves drawn in, unable to deny the impact of what they were experiencing around her. The audience seemed to collectively hold its breath, captivated by the unfolding performance. She could sense the anticipation, the shifting perception, and the realization that something extraordinary was happening. She played not for validation, but for the joy and fulfillment of expressing herself fully. In that moment, she understood that brilliance often resides where it is least expected, and that true talent cannot be measured by outward appearances or assumptions. As the music reached its climax, she felt a surge of emotion, a connection that transcended words or gestures. Every note carried the weight of her dedication, the passion she had cultivated in silence, and the brilliance she had long held within. The audience responded instinctively, their engagement growing, their appreciation evident in their expressions and body language. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a quiet triumph that came not from applause, but from the realization that she had conveyed her truth fully and authentically. The final measures of the piece were delicate and precise, yet they carried a profound emotional resonance. She allowed the last note to linger, holding it just long enough to let the room absorb its weight. Silence followed, a moment of stillness that seemed to stretch, filled with anticipation and reflection. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the space, growing louder with each passing second. It was not polite or forced. It was genuine, heartfelt, and earned. She stood, breathing deeply, a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet triumph coursing through her as she looked around. She saw the faces of the judges and the audience, all reflecting admiration, surprise, and respect. People who had underestimated her now realized the depth of her talent, the authenticity of her performance, and the brilliance she had revealed. Even her fellow performers, some of whom had seemed confident and untouchable, were visibly impressed, their assumptions shattered by the quiet power of her music. She had transformed a moment of expectation into a revelation of extraordinary skill and emotion. Walking back to her seat, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond recognition or applause. She had challenged assumptions, overcome fear, and demonstrated that brilliance often comes from the most unexpected places. She realized that the journey itself, the hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and the quiet perseverance was as important as the performance. In sharing her talent with the world, she had not only surprised others but also affirmed her own belief in her abilities. Sitting down, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Feeling the weight of what had just happened, the audience continued to clap, some still whispering in admiration, some nodding in understanding. She had delivered more than a performance. She had delivered a statement of authenticity, dedication, and brilliance. The experience left her energized, inspired, and ready for whatever came next, knowing that her quiet strength had the power to astonish, connect, and transform the expectations of everyone who had witnessed it. The room seemed to hold its breath as she reached the middle of her performance. Every note she played carried a depth that was impossible to ignore. People who had been skeptical or dismissive now leaned forward, completely absorbed in the music. She could feel the attention, not as pressure, but as a wave of energy that carried her forward. Each chord she struck was deliberate, yet full of life, and the audience felt the story she was telling through her fingers. She had practiced for years in quiet moments, alone in her room or in small, unnoticed spaces, perfecting every nuance of her craft. And now, all of that preparation was paying off. She could feel the confidence growing inside her with every note. The nerves that had once threatened to take over now transformed into focus and strength. She wasn't just performing. She was sharing a part of herself, something that could not be faked or replicated. It was honest, pure, and captivating. The judges, who had initially expected a simple, unremarkable performance, were now leaning forward in their seats. Their expressions had shifted from polite curiosity to genuine admiration. They scribbled notes quickly, but their eyes were fixed on her, unable to look away. They had underestimated her, just like so many others had. It was clear that they were witnessing something far beyond ordinary. Around her, the audience began to react in small ways. A slight nod of appreciation here, a quiet exhale there. People whispered softly to each other, trying to describe what they were feeling but finding words inadequate. The music spoke more clearly than any sentence ever could. She noticed the subtle changes in their expressions, the widening of eyes, the tilt of heads, the full attention that had shifted to her. Every person in the room was engaged. Caught up in the experience she was creating, her hands moved effortlessly across the keys, a combination of precision and freedom that had taken years to develop. She felt the flow of the music as if it were a living thing, guiding her, supporting her, lifting her beyond the confines of the stage. She played with intention, but also with a natural grace that made it seem spontaneous. It was a balance she had learned to master, the ability to blend control and creativity, structure and emotion. There was a moment when a particularly difficult passage arrived, one that required both technical skill and emotional expression. She felt a surge of adrenaline, but also a sense of calm. She had prepared for this. Every finger movement memorized, every timing practiced. But more than that, she trusted herself, trusted the years of dedication and quiet perseverance that had led to this moment. As she played, the notes rang clear and true, filled with the emotion she wanted to convey. The audience seemed to sense it too, leaning in, absorbed in the music, no longer judging or expecting anything but ready to be moved. She could feel the energy of the room shift. Where there had been skepticism, where there had been quiet chatter, there was now stillness. People were no longer comparing her to the others. She had become the standard, the focal point. Her music carried them along a journey, each chord telling a piece of her story, each pause inviting reflection. It was as if the room had transformed, becoming a space of shared experience, a moment of connection that transcended words. Her performance was more than technical skill. It was emotion made audible. She played not just for recognition, but for the sheer joy and necessity of expression. Each note, each melody, carried the weight of her dedication, her quiet struggles, and her unwavering passion. She thought of the countless hours spent in solitude, the moments of doubt, the times when she questioned herself, and realized that all of it had led to this instant. The music was a culmination of her journey, a revelation of her brilliance that no one had anticipated. The audience responded instinctively. There were small gasps, quiet murmurs of appreciation, and nods of understanding. People,